And now I invite Ivano Aiello to return for a different talk. This is the future research theme talk.
So how much money are you offering?
I'm broke, man. I know what I want already.
Likewise. Me again. Well, this is actually kind of sum up some of the things we heard together from my colleagues. Fantastic talks. And also, I'll see how we're moving forward and how really we want to learn from this event to be better prepared in the future and to build tools that agencies and colleagues can use in the case of future fires or baseline study. So the questions that I'd like to share with you today is, first of all, to Steve's question, how much metal was deposited? And again, I'm Esther Marsh centric right now, so we use that as an experimental round. How concentrated was the smoke? We have the body, we have the evidence, habeas corpus. Can we use that to reconstruct how much stuff was in the air during the fire? Where did the metals go, right? That's the kind of the question we're trying to ask here. And can we use this empirical data set, which is the first one I ever built as a consequence of a battery fire, because it was the first of everything. Can we use this empirical data set to create a model so that can predict what we found and can be used in other settings? So those are the kind of things I'd like to share with you very briefly. This is just, everything is starting. So we're applying for funding actively on top of our other jobs. We teach, we advise, we do other research. So we do our best, really. So the first slide is about something we already published in the scientific report paper, which is how much, was the mass of metals, NMCs, so the battery coated metal deposited on Esther Marsh as a result of the fire. So what we know is, we know the area, right? We can measure that very easily. We know the density, the bulk density of the sediments, and we can assume, as I mentioned earlier, so I already presented this data, the veneer that we are talking about, or the layer of ash that deposited, was anywhere between 1 and 5 millimeters. So using and then we have data that are highly concentrated in the transect along Esther Marsh, the before and after. So everything is based on a differential, not absolute values. This is really important. So whatever method you're using, you're subtracting things relative to each other. And this is the map of Esther Marsh showing 200 meter squares, in which we have different types of data set. So what we can do kind of easily, we can calculate what is the estimated deposit in inventory of metals. And as you can see, from 100 microns or 0.1 millimeters of potential veneer, potential ash layer, we get about half a ton of metal. And as we scale up the thickness, again, thickness is important, of the metal layer, we have figures that go up to 5 tons or 25.7 tons, okay? This is what our working hypothesis is. Our working hypothesis is that the ash layer was about 5 millimeters because of the evidence I showed you earlier. But this is how we got to this number. So we can use that as the starting M0 inventory. Then we can ask the first question, which is, can we use that mass to constrain the concentration of NMC that were present during the fire in the lower atmosphere over Exxon 2? So we start with the fire. We have about 2 kilometers downwind transport, and Peter will talk more about how the actual smoke plume migrated. Let's assume that we have a well-mixed layer, so everything stays in suspension, well-mixed. And then we can calculate the airborne concentration that was present during the fire based on the velocity which the metal particle settled out. So just imagine you have a cloud of smoke, because again, this material was airborne. I mean, that's obviously what we experienced and we saw and we observed. So if you have something in suspension, the velocity at which the smoke will clear out will be tightly dependent on the size of the particle. The larger the particle, the more they settle out very quickly. Okay, that's pretty common sense. So if we can calculate that, and we know the mass, you can make inference about how much stuff deposited. Then we can use a flux equation, which is very simple, which is the one you see here in the upper right, which is the dispositional flux will be equal to the mass divided by the area. and the time. It's a flux. So you need a mass, you need an area, you need the time. Think about a pipe and you're moving something through that pipe. You need to know the area, you need to know the time. If you know the mass, you can calculate the flux. Then based on the flux, you can divide the flux by the velocity, the position of velocity at which the particles settle to calculate the concentration. This is pretty straightforward. This is a very simple yet first order approach to calculate potential concentration. So how do we know the velocity? Because really that's the most critical part. Well, we have the evidence. As I mentioned earlier, and I'll show you again, we see the metal particles in the soil. So what we can do painstakingly, and I want to thank my student Staten here, because it's a needle in a haystack. Even though the concentration is really high, finding really tiny little bits in sediments is a very long process. But what we do, we look at the different samples and we detect them, and then we measure them under the microscope. Oops, you see there are 4 different types of aggregates that we see. There are larger aggregates, again, they're tiny, 200 microns. There are medium aggregates, about 100 microns. Then we go all the way to the finest aggregates, which is 4 microns, okay? And within the aggregates, you see there are little crystals. So those ones actually are even smaller. One word of caution here is that because of the tininess of this, even with a scanning electron microscope, needle in a haystack, we are biased towards coarser particles. We see them more likely, just because they're more apparent. But we are putting together a technique to actually be able to create this particle size distribution. So we have that. Now, the next step is let's apply this very simple equation. And the plot you see here on the left, it's a plot that plots the particle diameter in microns, and that's a logarithmic scale. So this is actually 1 millimeter at the very right hand and 0.1 millimeter to the left versus the required airborne concentration in milligrams per cubic meter. In other words, what this shows is that the coarser the particle size, the lesser would be the concentration of the smoke plume at the time of the fire, assuming that there was only one particle size, okay? So let's plot our range of particle sizes we observed in a scanning electron microscope so far. It's gonna take us months to go over all the samples. And what we see is that the range of observed aggregate actually intercepts this curve over this range of concentration below 10 milligrams per cubic meter. What does it mean? To give a context, typical heavy wildfire smoke ranges between 0.1 and 1 milligram per cubic meter, while near source industrial fire range between 1 and 10 milligrams per cubic meters, which is, kind of the range we're looking at here. But what this is telling us is that it seems as though although fine particulates, as we know, dominates toxicity, how much you can inhale depends on the size of the particle, the coarser particles seem to have dominated the concentration that then resulted in a deposited mass, okay? Which means that the particles that settle in Esther Marsh, again, this is very much specific to Esther Marsh. It does not cover the whole, area that might have been entrained by the smoke plume. We'll keep working on this and we'll definitely keep you posted. The next aspect that we were discussing together is about where did the battery metals go? Now, you heard different talks. They were about soil, as the one I presented, water, and then biota. So I put together 3 plots that represent the data set that you just saw together. And you can see time on the bottom axis and this cobalt concentration and y-axis in parts per million or parts per billion. What you still saw that all these graphs seem to be trending the same way, right? There's this pulse, this rapid increase that was recorded in surface soil. Now, actually, very rapidly, seems to have propagated in the water as a dissolved phase, which tells us that most likely the wetlands are incubators for dissolved metals. In other words, the metals deposited really rapidly, they dissociated and got into the pore water. We know from previous studies that the Alconsul marshes are spongy. They're very easy to circulate water within the pores so that they get kind of washed by the tidal waters that come in and out. So there's a connectivity between the two. And finally, we saw results from the biota, those all put together. So that shows essentially how the signal has been propagating through this different compartment, okay? So we know that they move, but we don't know how fast. We don't know how much and we don't know how fast. This is our next step. And what we're working on is a predictive model, compartment model, of which I'm giving you the simplified version of it for the sake of our conversation, because we do have the ability to constrain some of those part of the model. What is a compartmental model? It's seeing the different parts of the ecosystem as boxes that inputs and outputs. Okay, and we transfer the metals through the different models through those transfer coefficient that you can see listed here, which is the position, K depth, K dissolution, K tidal, which is the tidal entrainment, and K export to the ocean, and K bio, which is the uptake by organisms. So those are fluxes that we can measure, and that's what we're setting out to do in the next few months or years, so that we can create a model that can predict what we observe in our monitoring data sets. Does it make sense? So we have the empirical evidence, and now we are going to build a model that can constrain this empirical evidence. And we need a lot of money to do that. Why are we doing this? Because then we can use this, other people, other colleagues, other agencies can use this approach in other situations by modifying very basic parameters to predict, understand how fast the contaminant will move through the system, and be able to address potential issues of toxicity and contamination. Our goal, and that's an infographic that we just applied for funding again with our RNFRF, and we're still looking for support, is to be able to really learn from this experience. And one thing that we learned is that it's very important to bring together, I mentioned this earlier, I want to repeat, different agency, different scientists, take advantage of academia. We have no life. We work 24/7. We have we're doing it. Whatever it takes, whatever happens, money, no money, we're just going to do it because we know it's the right thing to do. But, it would be great, I think, if there's more communication between all of us, and I'm sure we'll talk more about this during the panel. Our offer is to create a model that links a possible source of, an event such as a battery fire to the atmospheric conditions and release, to the observation in the field, to the laboratory experiments. We're setting out to recreate some of those reactions, for instance, the dissolution of metals in the lab, as Max mentioned, or the uptake by biota, by invertebrate organisms, by feeding them metals, and see how fast they take them up, and then build this together into a compartmental model that can be used and can have also the decision making process. And this should involve all the different agencies that you see listed here. So that was my very short but talk, and I think this is really important. It's what we do next. Let's learn from it, and let's continue monitoring to establish the baseline, the importance of baseline. That's what you heard over and over. We had classes actually here, which are really an incredible resource because we have data just because we teach this stuff. But this really tells you how important it is to know the before to establish the after. And thank you. I'm here for any questions.
Emily?
Some of you might know that I have a bachelor's in public health, and this tickles some of my public health knowledge. I'm curious, are there any comparable, because you're talking about building a model that's usable for other similar issues. I'm curious if you've looked at past issues that are similar. Has anybody else made a model like this? And are there any comparable events that you have seen that, or the group has seen, that you're taking that information also and applying it here?
Yes, indeed. There are other examples in the literature of, well, not exactly like that, obviously, because this is the first. There are other models that use the same approach, which is really basic approach of compartments in the literature. And I studied the literature, and that's why I came up with these things. I mean, that's what we do, right? We learn from each other. We build on top of each other. And indeed, I can share with you. I'm sure you're probably more familiar with the actual literature. Yes, there are for different types of contaminants, not for specifically matter. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Amanda, are there any questions on Zoom?
Yes, a couple of folks are asking about what form the metals were that were measured. Were they metal oxides?
Well, that's a really good question. So they're in the metallic form, right? So they're oxidized. When they build those crystalline nanospheres, whatever you want to call them, they are oxidized. Yes. And but they're also very reactive. So, which is what we're learning. As soon as they get deposited in the soils and they start interacting with the pond waters, and you have dissolution and precipitation. Probably that happens over time, several times.
Yeah, I mean, on the particle phase, yes, they're mostly oxides or part of the main matrix of the particle, and then in the middle phase, it's they can be complex to carbonates and things like this. But what we measure is the total concentration. So we release all those complexities and measure just the metal itself via LCPMS.
Right, the digestive, exactly.
Becky?
Thank you very much. Can your model possibly inform other communities similar to the estuary here, where there are battery energy projects that could become thermal runaway also, that could encourage them to start collecting baseline information now?
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, that's exactly the point here, is to build to build on the knowledge of what we learn, and also the prediction that we're able to do to inform existing and future industrial, not just battery storage facility, but these industrial projects where, or the other big component of risk associated with fires, which is the wilderness urban interface, where there are fires in places like Los Angeles where there batteries and other potentially contaminants are released as a result of the fire. So you can start thinking a different situation, but definitely this is going to be built around wetlands and coastal environments, because that's what we're doing with. But then the thinking can be translated. So we want to also make it accessible, open access, so everyone can use it and transform it as
Thank you. And I'm thinking of the College Lake situation in Watsonville with the Seahawk project in permitting process now to require that baseline monitoring occur.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
It's good to know right before, and yeah.
Amanda, do you have any pressing questions on Zoom?
Only one that I'm not sure if you'll know off the top of your head. How much nickel, manganese, and cobalt is in a battery module? I think you found that, right?
Yeah. So I can tell you, well, it depends how big is the battery module. That's all. And so in lithium-ion batteries, which use this NMC 532, which is the ratio between the elements, it's a little less than 50% of the mass. Talking about the mass, is a little less than 50% of the battery. And then there's the graphite, there's all the different parts of the battery, the copper and the wiring and all that. But it's 50%. So if the battery is 1 kilogram, it will be 500 grams and so on.
Just one more quick question from Brian.
Appreciate it, my man. Just a quick observation. In speaking to communities literally all over the world, we're in a very unique situation. While this is the greatest event of this nature and a real tragedy, the concentration of brainpower here is unique. And I just want to say that the work that you and your colleagues are doing has global implications. In speaking to these communities, the questions that have come out of them and the inability that I've learned for them to gather the type of information you have is extraordinary. And so the work that's being done has applications that are far reaching. And I hope you'll have the opportunity to continue to pursue this, generate a vault of data that can help communities understand what's going to potentially, in some instances, be the risks of this technology, as opposed to reacting to them without the resources you provide. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's a very nice. Thank you.